Hi, this is Jennifer Averill at DCL. Welcome to today's webinar, eBooks in the Classroom, a Stakeholder's Guide to Going Digital. Our presenter today is Mercy Pilkington. I want to welcome you all to the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, I'm just going to handle a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, the webinar, it will be recorded. It is being recorded presently. It will be available for playback. We do not make our slide decks technically available, but the webinar itself will be available for playback, and that takes us typically 24 to 48 hours. It will be sent to you. It can be sent on request, and if any of your friends or neighbors are interested, and we will also post that on our website at www.dclab.com. In addition, while this webinar does not have an option for verbal Q&A, we will conduct a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. So over the course of the webinar, if you have a question that comes to mind, you will see on your panel, you should see on your panel, a question box. You can type that in, I will see it, and I will pose those questions to Mercy when we reach the question and answer portion of the webinar. So as anything comes to mind, please feel free to go ahead and type that in. It will not in any way throw us off course. It's absolutely fine. And we look forward to giving you feedback and answering your questions. All right, so we're going to get started. Before we do, and before I introduce Mercy and tell you a little bit about her, I'm going to tell you briefly about DCL. DCL is Data Conversion Laboratory. We blend years of conversion experience with cutting-edge technology and the infrastructure to make the process easy and efficient. We are U.S.-based, which is a wonderful thing and makes us very available to our clientele. We also have a brand new website that I hope you will check out. Again, that is www.dclab.com. We offer a very broad array of services, as you can see, and that ranges from publisher and individual writer eBooks all the way up to very large-scale conversion for business. We have a very broad client base across a wide array of industries. So if you want more information about DCL, there will be contact information at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to get in touch. Now, about Mercy Pilkington, I'm really thrilled to be introducing Mercy today. We have been working together pretty much since I started at DCL. She is a 16-year veteran teacher and published author. What we didn't put here on her bio is that she's also super cool. She is a young adult author, and she has worked as a teacher in a juvenile correctional facility. She is a staff writer for goodereader.com and knows an awful lot about e-readers and e-books and going digital in the classroom. She's now has taken all of that experience to launch her own company. She's already had some success. We're very excited for her as the CEO of Author Options, and there's her website right there, authoroptions.com, where she and her staff help authors and publishers with every aspect of print and digital book creation. And now I'm going to quite happily turn this over to Mercy. Hi, Mercy. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good.
Here we go.
All right. Okay, great. So we see some background. From humble beginnings, yes, I cover digital publishing and publishing industry news for Good e-Reader, which I still do. It gives me a lot of insight into what's happening in the industry, which is always useful information. I have a good span of classroom teaching experience in both public school and in the correctional facility, and have spent most of that time working with at-risk high schoolers, whether it was incarcerated or public school. And, of course, bringing to the publishing aspect of it, I'm a hybrid author, which means I have some books that were traditionally published by a publishing company and other titles that I self-publish on my own. And so really what we wanted to bring today to the stakeholders, and we'll get into in just a second, we'll get to talking about what exactly is a stakeholder, but basically I started using eBooks in 2009, which for classroom settings was fairly early. When I arrived in this facility where it was a completely different teaching experience, a whole new world of education, it was shocking to me that so many of my students, first of all, were functionally illiterate, even at the high school level, which should not come as a surprise to anyone who's worked with at-risk or incarcerated youth or in any kind of correctional facility. We often find low education and low appreciation for education to go hand in hand with, unfortunately, with criminal activity. But also the fact that we had lots of money available to us because we were both Department of Education and Department of Corrections. But also that my students were very technologically illiterate. That was a huge surprise to me. You always hear, if you can't program the VCR clock, go get your neighbor's kid and he can do it. And that was not the case with my students. Many of them came from very poor rural schools, since we served 11 counties, that had no computer lab, let alone classroom computers, tablets, iPads, anything like that. And so it was a surprise to see what my students did not know that I assumed they would know. So I began with the eBooks. Like I said, we had funding available, and it was a great way to get a lot of content very quickly. But some of the reasons that I put up there, first of all, once we push aside the fact that there's not really any good reason not to bring digital books to a classroom, we had, first of all, accessibility. We had a lot of students who came to us, and this will be true of any educational setting, who either needed glasses and didn't have them, had never been diagnosed with vision problems, learning disabilities, things like that. So it helped address those accessibility issues. There was a lot of convenience when you're in a small facility that is not set up to be a school, but of course this is true for classroom teachers. Storage is always an issue. So finding a place to put 40 copies of To Kill a Mockingbird is difficult, and so it was convenient to have e-readers that were stocked with hundreds of books. The high access. So basically, I very clearly remember students holding an e-reader and saying, do you have this book? And I would say, oh, I don't have that one. And I would type a few keys on my keyboard and say, now I do. Open it up again, and there it is. And so that access was amazing to my students. High interest level reading. That was basically, I was able to access virtually any title that was sold by that ebook platform on the retail website. And so I wasn't limited in terms of what had been approved by Common Core or what had been budgeted for 2 years ago or the last time the library got a grant. I wasn't held to that issue. So once the funding was available to actually purchase ebooks, basically within the confines of my school's limitations on content issues, there was anything. I could buy basically any title. And finally, what drives so much in education was the price. Once the devices were actually paid for and funded, the ebooks were very economical, and it was just a great way to provide mass amounts, for example, a class set of books, versus just individual titles that students wanted to read. And that brings us to the fact that there are a wide variety of devices out there. Now, in 2009, there were not. There were only a few household name e-readers. And of course, the tablets are not available yet. The iPad didn't come out until the following year. And when it did, it was a pipe dream for classrooms to someday have iPads. I love how they're in every school now, just about. But they came at different price points. And I remember the original e-readers I bought the first year were almost $300 a piece. And of course, that is just not the case anymore, so thankfully. But there are also different features that each one offers. So basically, teachers or stakeholders, administrators, whomever, would have to look at what their students' needs are based on their demographics and decide which devices would be best. Would it be better to invest in tablets that do lots of things? Would it be better, as in the case of my students, to hand them a very simple, basic device that doesn't require a lot of technological know-how? And again, for accessibility options, if you're looking at an at-risk population, or if you're looking at a low English language population, you might want something that does a little more, especially in terms of maybe offering foreign language read aloud, things like that. So really, it has to be based on the individual needs of the school and the student as to which devices the school might want to invest in. Okay, and we have, again, some more information. Once those devices are available, the concept of the device, excuse me, that's when funding has to come around. Once a school is on board with saying we want to make the shift to digital reading, digital textbooks, that's where they have to start looking for the money. And fortunately, we are living in an excellent time for funding for digital devices. There are so many initiatives out there that are aimed at putting more technology into students' hands, making more digitally literate students. 21st century technology initiatives, but also just a ton of grants. There are, fortunately, an upswing in our economy. There are a lot of companies looking to invest in education, even in terms of just providing grant funding for teachers. And there's also just individual help. It does take a little more legwork on the part of the school, the teachers, and the administrators, but it is actually very easy to find people who are willing to help with content for your e-readers or tablets once you actually have the devices in place. So whereas that used to be a huge obstacle in terms of funding when we were discussing the $300 e-readers, again, that's no longer the case. And there are many options, in fact, for the students to provide their own devices. And we'll get to that in a second. Now, one of the hard sells is typically parents. Now, in the correctional facility, I personally did not have interaction with the youth's parents. That was actually not allowed. But I understand through my own children going to school and through friends of mine who are teachers that it is often a hard sell for parents, grandparents, and some people who basically don't see the educational possibilities in digital reading. A lot of people equate it with playtime, and it's not. Mostly this would come from people who are not e-readers themselves. So people who do not download books and read them might actually have some issue with funding these for schools or having a school-wide initiative. Very recently, in the last couple of years, one state actually did away with cursive writing in the curriculum, and they said it was potentially just a waste of time to spend class time in the elementary school and then to require it in middle school and high school when we need to be focusing on making our students more proficient typers, making them more proficient in using non-QWERTY keyboards, for example, that they will use on tablets in the workplace as adults. And it was met with a lot of resistance. So unfortunately, the educational arena is not known for being the first adopters of technology, and the same was true with digital reading. It was not until we actually were putting e-readers into hands of people that they actually looked at it, played with it, scrolled through books, touched the buttons, that they could say, well, wow, this is really great, and you're saying there's 300 books in here? And I'm saying, yes, this one device has more books than your child's library at school. And that's when it really kind of got their interest. But unfortunately, that involvement is crucial. So we've got to have the parents on board in order to fully adopt classroom textbooks. We still have parents who wait the first few days of school armed with scissors, tape, and brown paper grocery sacks, ready to wrap their children's textbooks. And when their child comes home with 2 textbooks, because those are the only 2 that the school did not adopt digitally, the parents kind of voice their opinion on that. They kind of complain because it's what they know as education from their own childhoods. So showing showing a parent their student's digital textbook on an iPad or a smartphone, it still raises that ire a little bit. And they kind of question how effective can this book really be. Once they see the convenience, once you unplug an iPad in the morning, hand it to your child and say, okay, you're all ready for school, that's when they start to know, first of all, let alone the cost savings, but the convenience. There are no more books left in lockers when you had homework and things like that. Having to read a book, for example, for class, if the teacher said all the students this year need to purchase a copy of The Outsiders, which my daughter had to read over the summer. It was not a factor of having to order it and have it delivered or having to make a trip into town, hope the library had their copy. We got it for $3.99 on the internet, and she read it on her own iPad. But parents have a lot of potential in creating a digital library for a school. Once the parents are on board with it, you will find that so many parents who maybe could not have taken it upon themselves to buy a $15 to $18 book for their child's classroom or for the school library are more than willing to buy a downloaded iTunes card or Amazon gift card or things like that. And so once parents do see the benefit to it and see the cost savings to the school and to the community, then that's when they tend to get a little more involved, a little more active with a digital library. And of course the students, they can surprisingly be a hard sell. When e-reading first took off in its current evolution, it was actually the teenagers who were the least likely demographic to adopt e-reading. It was surprising that senior citizens were so early in their adoption, that they immediately saw the benefit to being able to change the font size or to not having to drive to a library or purchase an expensive edition of a book. But it was actually the teenagers who were the lowest at one point in their likeliness to adopt e-reading. They still saw their technology, even their tablets and smartphones, for social time, for playtime. And so when it came to reading a book for school or even using a digital textbook, then they were a little more resistant, and quickly they caught on as well. Once again, they were not lugging a 40-pound backpack full of books or they could get a book that they had forgotten at school. They could just hop online, order it really quickly, and start reading tonight's homework in their novel they were assigned to read. It quickly became something that they adopted socially or that they adopted for their own personal reading. But getting the students on board can be difficult, especially if they're not used to this level of technology. One of the things that really was an obstacle for a lot of people, regardless of their age, was the fact that ebooks are not simply digital versions of printed books. And so once people really get past that, then they start to see the benefits to it, such as highlighting unknown words, having your students with the ability to simply click on a word and have the definition come up. It makes their comprehension so much stronger. They can save their place. So they know that when they turn that device back on or go back into that app or simply click that title again, it will be waiting right where they left off. Of course, there are also syncing versions, so if they have an audiobook or if they read it on their smartphone and then go home and read it on their desktop, they can pick up where they left off. And one of the things that initially took off, but was slow again to be adopted on a widespread basis, was social reading. And we're seeing a little upswing in that as well, where you can actually talk to other people who are reading the same book and get their perceptions of it. We do find it being a lot more popular at the college level than in the public education level, where a student can go online through the book, through the app, or through the dedicated reader, and can find people who are reading the same section and ask for clarification or say, what did you think of this portion? We're especially finding that popular in digital textbooks, where the students can actually interact with their own professors or with other professors who use that text. And so as they're doing their homework, they're able to contact a PhD level professor and get some clarification on that homework as well. So again, once the benefits are outlined for people, especially students, then they can see how this might be a great thing for them to adopt. But here's one of the things that, regardless of the issue in education, we have to ask, who is a stakeholder? And it doesn't just mean for digital. This pertains to everything involving education. And in this case, a stakeholder is everyone, especially when we're talking about public school or state-funded schools. Everyone has a stake in it, because even if it's not their own child in the classroom, if they're not the student or the teacher, they are at least a community member who funded that classroom. And so one of the big obstacles, and of course we saw this again with that discussion of cursive writing, was a lot of people who lashed out at what they see as a waste of funds or as the quick adoption of something that they think is a flash in the pan. We do unfortunately find this a lot in education. We almost have these cyclical trends that come back around every once in a while. Block scheduling, year-round education, 21st century classroom, Common Core, No Child Left Behind, school uniforms even. The list goes on of things that we do experiment with and try to make the best possible educational setting. But I think we find a lot of the time that our stakeholders are very tired of the newest thing to come down the pike. And so it has made people kind of resistant. When you look at an older person especially, or a city councilman, and say, we want some money because we're not going to have textbooks anymore. We're going to do everything on the computer. You can come up against some resistance. And so the best thing to do is to offer these opportunities for everyone to understand what this can actually do in terms of saving funds, reaching students, helping students with accessibility issues, and so on. Okay, what we need to know is, first of all, if you're trying to convince someone who might be a little resistant, show them a cost breakdown. Now, those original e-readers I bought, again, were almost $300 a piece. That was several years ago, so of course the prices are lower now. The announcement yesterday of the iPhone 5 is a third of the cost of what I bought. The new $99 iPhone 5C is not even $100 compared to what I was spending at the time for e-readers. A good, typical, well-known brand e-reader can be had for as little as $79 to $99. iPads are even coming down in price, and of course there's a lot of initiative right now to put tablets in classrooms. A lot of money is being earmarked for that. And so once people find out how much money was spent on the technology, that does kind of make them a little more resistant, oddly. They start to say that, well, you bought this $400 tablet, and now you want more money to put stuff on it. So showing them exactly what it would cost to purchase books, for example, for your library, for a classroom, versus what it would cost for the ebook. And then taking into account things like damage, loss, things like that, that would no longer be a factor. If you can provide solid numbers for people, then again, they feel like they have more information. You have to look at the cost up front, though, of purchasing whichever technology you will use, whether it's e-readers, tablets, or desktop computers, and then basically demonstrate what the cost of typical ebooks would be, or the reading apps, for example, or reading them on PCs. There are technology needs that the school has to provide. Even if you're using a Bring Your Own Device initiative, which we'll get to in a second, you have to provide the Wi-Fi. There is a town very close to mine that provided Wi-Fi for the entire city. Any student who attends that school system has internet access now at home. And if they live too far from these little sensors that have been put up around the town to provide this, they were provided with air cards. And so that money came from a grant. Their mayor is very, very much involved in creating a technological literacy and a digital literacy. And so, again, there are efforts that have to be taken into consideration. That was not an overnight decision. That money had to be earmarked several years in advance to be built up enough to provide that. You have device versus computer decisions. Which device would you go with? And again, we talked about that briefly in the beginning, that you have to take into account your demographics, your school's needs, even your town's needs. Would it be better to provide a desktop, a tablet, or an e-reader? And so there are basically decisions that have to be made and very clearly laid out before anything can move forward. The Bring Your Own Device initiative is actually becoming very popular. It's one that's used at my children's school, and immediately it was met with resistance. It was very interesting to me that the years that I taught public school back in 1990 whatever, we were strictly ordered to take away anything that even looked like a device. If the students had a Walkman, a CD player, a cell phone, whatever, we were to take it away. And I have to, sadly, what actually changed that mentality for education was due in large part to the rash of school shootings that happened around the era of Columbine. Up until that point, parents were fine with the regulations that this does not belong in school. Once those emergencies started cropping up, we had parents who were very outspoken, correctly, about the fact that my child had a cell phone and it was in her locker, or it was in her car, or it was in her purse turned off. How many lives could have been saved if these students had been able to text someone or call someone? And so that really started people looking at saying, you know, we have technology and we're not making the best use of it. Now, as that translates into education, however, we have this technology. Students got iPads for Christmas, have a smartphone. I can't even think of how many students have an iPhone. My daughter reminds me constantly how many of her classmates have one, and she does not. But basically, once the parents have invested in the device for their own child, why not take advantage of it? Put it to good use in school. My daughters are in 5th and 8th grade, and both of them use iPads all day long. The one for the 8th grader was one that we purchased for her just as a Christmas present. My 5th grader actually has one provided by the school due to her handicap, and so it's part of her IEP. And so basically, those students use those devices all the time. And so a Bring Your Own Device initiative can be put into place. It is a hard sell to administrators and stakeholders. It is very easy to say, but the kids are just going to play games. I will get an email occasionally from my daughter. Hey, Mom, what you doing? And I will respond, I'm working, and so should you. Get back to work. Stop emailing me. So, but it is fun in downtime. You know? So there are very strict guidelines that can be created, and basically very strict consequences for breaking those guidelines. One of the things that schools have come up against, and so you need to know this, is the fact that if that Wi-Fi is funded with public funds, there can be issues with putting a filter on it and restricting access, so basically what amounts to censorship. So that has to be something that does have to be addressed before the issue comes up. There have been public libraries who have opted to just get rid of their computers because they were not allowed to filter the internet, for example, because those computers had been paid for with government money. So that needs to be looked at and addressed before you can incorporate any kind of Bring Your Own Device. But it can be done, and there are lots and lots of guidelines on the internet that you can look up. Okay, there are pros and cons to a digital classroom. Let's get the cons out of the way first. The one that always comes up, and I will say this comes up whether it is a school-provided or Bring Your Own Device initiative, the damage or destruction to the devices. Yes, it is always a possibility. Things get broken in class, whether it's through intentional or willful destruction or just wear and tear. Things do get damaged. But that is something that schools have faced since the beginning of schools. Basically, someone's pencil got broken and then it became a book and then it moved on to computers. And so there are funding sources built in. When you factor your budget, you do tend to build in a wear and tear kind of budget. Under Bring Your Own Device, that is very clearly laid out that the school is absolutely not responsible for any damage to the device. If it's in the student's hands, the parents took the risk. And as parents, we have to sign off on that before we are allowed to send our child's device to school. Even to the fact that tech support will not be provided. If the teacher has time to come help a student with an app or with logging on to the internet or connecting, if the teacher has time, she will do it. She is not required to. So if your child's device, for example, would not connect to the school Wi-Fi, you will need to take that up with the device manufacturer or in something within the app at home. Funding is also an issue. One of the things that I came up against when I got the money for the e-readers was blessed with several $1,000s to buy these e-readers up front. I was so excited. They arrived, they were shiny. I took the plastic off them, plugged them in, and charged them, and was not allowed to buy eBooks. Basically, I was told if you cannot put a sticker on it that says property of such and such school system, you cannot buy it with school funding. That was a huge obstacle. And truthfully, my school system worked very hard, looking at the issue from every side, wondering, what can we call it, software download, well, can we do this? And at the time, the answer was no. I'm hopeful that that situation has improved, and I'm sure it has, because schools are investing in digital textbooks. So I know it is possible to buy eBooks. What I did in the meantime, since it wasn't possible at that moment, was to get lots of grants. And so I've actually received several $1,000s in grant money to buy eBooks with. And so, like I said, the funding can be there, and some of the legwork does have to be done. Now, this is always the best part, the pros. First of all, we have the first two issues right up there on your screen are accessibility issues. Students can change the font size. They can incorporate a read aloud feature if that's available on the device that you chose. And so right off the bat, you've addressed several accessibility issues. You have gone out of your way and gone above and beyond to make sure that all students in your classroom have the same access to learning. If you were to use a device that allowed you to purchase the Spanish language edition, for example, you can also buy side by side where you have Spanish and English on the same page, things like that. So you are really going out of your way to make sure that all of your students are included, which is, again, another great point to make for your stakeholders. Portability was huge. Again, no classroom out there has enough storage space. And so having all of my books stored in these e-readers, something that the students wanted to be reading anyway, they could choose their own text. They had self-selected material, but they also had the access to the class text that I was requiring. So having that portability was great. The WhisperSync, that is actually a trademark name for the brand of e-reader that I chose, but it basically picks up where you left off. If you switch devices, if I have one student that I had to say, for example, I had to move someone and put him over here, I can just log him out of that device, take him over to the desktop in the corner, open the app, and it will open his book where he left off. So that is a very underrated feature. I think a lot of people may not see as much need for it, but it really is helpful. The biggest pro, I saved this one because it can take some time, was I saw an immediate increase in the level of classroom behavior. It immediately improved. Now, the device that I chose to go with does offer read aloud, so each of my e-readers I made sure had a pair of headphones. No one's required to listen to their audio, or to the e-book, excuse me, not audiobook. But at the same time, no one knows who is listening. So especially teaching high schoolers and kids who were very tough on the outside and tender on the inside, I had a lot of students who did not want to admit they could not read. I had some who quite proudly said, oh, I can't read at all. And then I had others who were very embarrassed by it and very threatened by what they perceived to be other students' academic ability. And by offering everyone headphones, I simply loaded a few songs, some quiet classical music, into the e-readers, and no one knew if they were listening, if the student next to them was listening to the book being read to them because they couldn't read, or if they were listening to some music. Also, students who didn't want either, I would tell them, you don't have to wear the headphones, but if you do, it might block out some sound and help you concentrate. I rarely had students not take the headphones when they were offered. Also, having this in place where the student knows I don't have to be the best reader. I can have it read to me. I can follow along. I can have it turn the pages for me so I don't even have to keep up. However the student chooses to learn with the e-reader, the increase in the behavior came from the fact that they came to school knowing it was not going to be as hard as it used to be. So the attitude towards school and towards reading shifted. Where it used to be, why do we have to read this book? They could put that aside and they could actually get into a discussion of what the book was actually about because they heard it and they didn't just have to read it. Students who didn't quite need that level of support had the ability to right there on the screen find out what a word meant. So it was less of a struggle to read and understand. Having students read while they listen also helps, we know, with comprehension. I taught so many students over the years who would say, I can read, I just don't remember what I read. Well, sweetie, that's because you didn't comprehend it. And so this helped on a lot of levels, and it broke down a lot of the preconceived barriers that students would put up before they ever showed up in class. Funding sources. I was very surprised that there was so much money available. Now, like I said, the correctional facility was actually quite the nirvana for teaching because we had sources from other areas. Also, we were a rotating population, so at any one time we only housed 48 juveniles, but throughout the course of one school year I would quite easily teach between 400 and 600 students, even though I only taught them 48 at a time. So what that meant was at the end of the year, when it was time to fill out our report and be eligible for Title I funding, we were roughly the same size as a public school high school. And what that meant was, as the only English teacher in the facility, I was funded for English class as though I was a large high school. So, like I said, we had a lot more access to some of this money. So in order for this webinar today, I actually looked up, we have a lot of options. There are so many grants out there. I will go ahead and tell you, if you're writing stuff down, I received the Dollar General Youth Literacy Grant 2 years in a row. The way that grant is arranged, you receive an email to tell you that the list of winners is available. They do not specifically email teachers and say you were chosen because they don't have enough time. They choose so many classrooms that the money was basically just kind of assigned and we were just all told to go check the list. I had to print out the list of winners because it was so small I couldn't read it on my screen, and it was 17 pages long once I printed it out that first year. So 17 pages of small type font won the grants. And so that money is available. We were also given the Laura Bush grant for our library, which this is a library. So since we didn't have a standalone library room, the e-readers became our school library. And so we were able to use that grant money to buy e-books. We have a lot of donors, people who are, if you simply said to them, you know, I need funding for some e-books, here's the situation. A lot of people are willing to fund it, even down to your local community members and parents, because I'm not asking for a $20 book anymore, I'm asking for a $4.99 book. And that one purchase can get me several copies of it. One of the things I want to take a break away from just for a second, we are possibly all envisioning textbooks, classic literature, things like that, besides the public domain works. Really investigate, if you're interested in using ebooks, investigate the self-published authors. There are a wide variety of authors out there who would be happy to donate print and ebook copies of their books, especially if you said, my students will write a review of your book, or I will come up with discussion questions and give them to you after we read your book. So if you come across any titles where you have access to actually reaching out to the author, don't hesitate. Tell them who you are, where you teach, where your school is, what you're trying to accomplish with ebooks, and just ask. The worst they will tell you is, I can't do that, but at best they might tell you, here's 40 copies of it. So especially if you have something to offer, like spreading the word about their book. You can actually host a digital book drive and a digital book fair. You're probably very familiar with the Scholastic book fairs. They are awesome. They are my favorite time of the year in school and as a public school teacher. But you can have digital ones as well. Even on a class website, simply list, put thumbnail images of the book covers, tell them which ones are for sale, where to buy it, and that way the parents are buying for their own students, and you can simply put your wish list at the bottom and say, while you're buying a book for yourself, we would love one as well. This would be another excellent thing to do with those indie authors and tell them we will feature your book on our class website in exchange for so many copies of it. Multi-device licensing. There are a few e-readers out there where if you purchase the book one time, you are eligible to put it on 6 devices or 6 computers for that one purchase price. I had a class set of 10 devices because we have a small class size in the facility, and buying a $4 or $5 book one time enabled it to be on 6 of the devices at once and to be licensed for use. It was not exclusive. We were not required to close out one device before another student can use it. And so that is how the books are licensed. And so there are also lots of different platforms that will offer that kind of pricing as well. Again, stakeholders can be, I hate to say difficult, they can be a hard sell on going digital. One of the best things you can do is offer Community Digital Day, letting people just come in and take advantage of what you've got to offer students. Let them see what the students can actually work with, and let them actually play with them. Show them a variety of apps, show them a variety of devices, and let them actually experience it. Let these people hear some of the read aloud. One of the things I have noticed, sadly in my experience as a teacher, is that they're not usually well attended. And so you would want to incorporate this into some other existing event. In the South, where I am, football reigns supreme. So have a table set up at the football game on Friday night at the high school and let people actually experience e-reading and show them how easy it is. Have a list of prices. Here's what the print book costs, here's what the e-book costs. And you could actually, if you were one of those devices that had multi-licensing, divide it. Go ahead and divide that price by 6 and show them the difference in what it costs to buy a book versus buy an e-book. At this event, you would want to listen to their viewpoints. Again, it's not enough to just say to somebody, this is the wave of the future. This is how it's going to be. When e-reading first took off in this state, in this format, we saw critics on both sides, that it would be the death of paper and that it would be a flash in the pan, that nobody was going to read on a small screen. And now we're seeing, obviously, that's not the case. Both formats are valid, both have their uses, and sometimes it can still be difficult to show someone this is really a good tool. But that's the thing, is to present it that way as simply a tool. It is just another way to read a book. It is not to replace books and replace learning. It is just another opportunity for students who learn differently, for schools who can't afford a lot of material, who can't store a lot of material, and who can't replace a lot of material. It's just a different format for them to offer the same content. Know ahead of time, even before you're trying to explain it to a stakeholder, but for yourself, for the schools and records, you have to understand what your academic goals are going to be with your e-reading. I found myself often in my classroom simply passing out the e-readers because we had a few minutes left in class. Again, that's not really a strong use of the technology, and it's certainly not one that people should invest in, should get behind paying for, if that's all you're going to do with it. So have clear academic plans for what your goals are with digital books, whether they're textbooks or novels, for example. Look them and explain the funding benefits to both textbooks and classroom books. One of the things that a lot of people are still very surprised by is the fact that digital textbooks are not exponentially cheaper than printed textbooks. The only huge savings in digital textbooks is in having to purchase less of them if there's licensing agreements, but also in not having to replace them as readily. The cost of creating a textbook, whether it's at the college level or the public school level, is not the paper and the ink and the shipping. The cost is in the team of PhDs who wrote it. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand. So if you were to demonstrate to your stakeholders that, here is a $90 fourth grade math book, and here is a $75 fourth grade math book, there might be some reluctance to get behind it and to say, if it's only going to save us $15, why are we going for this all new system and having to invest in technology? Where you actually have that is in students not losing the books. You have it in not having to replace lost or damaged books. And you also have it in the ability to update content. Both of my daughters, and here we are in 2013, I looked for the purposes of this webinar. Both of them have a print social studies book, and neither of them doesn't make any mention of President Obama, so we have not yet had a black president in our textbooks, and a host of other issues. In their science books, Pluto is still a planet. It's only because we have not had a social studies or science adoption year. And so you have the added benefit in your textbook arena of being able to update information constantly without having to make an expensive new purchase. One of the things you will definitely want to do if you're considering bringing your own device is have those guidelines laid out and be ready to answer questions. When someone says to you, how do you know the kids aren't just playing Candy Crush? Well, you don't. You take it upon yourself to have them sign the agreement, to know the clear consequences, and to know that they will lose their right to bring a device to school if they abuse it. You do have your filters, and so you can control the websites that they go to for the most part. I will tell you one thing from working with teenagers, they know how to get around them. So be prepared, and be prepared to answer that question to stakeholders. Okay, I think we're ready for some questions.
Hi again. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. As you can see, our information for DCL is there. You can see more of Mercy's writing at goodereader.com and find out more about her company at authoroptions.com. We do have some questions. I'm going to scroll through them. I know the first one that I noticed was one about fundraising. Basically, Mercy, it sounds like there's a lot of fundraising opportunities and specifically a lot of grant opportunities. How would you suggest someone brand new to looking for grant opportunities might get started? Is there kind of an easy way to do that?
There actually is, and I know in the world of grant writing, you can actually find people whose career is a grant writer. In education, we are finding that is not necessarily the situation, especially in public education. It is no longer quite as involved in that. If I were a hospital who needed a grant for a $6 million cancer wing, yes, that involves a professional grant writer, research, things like that. For classroom funding purposes, where we're looking at grant values between $500 and $3,000, often what I came across was fill in the blank. Lots of information, just type it in and hit submit. And seriously, once I got to the point where I had gathered all of my data, all of my information, because they will want things like your 503C status, your nonprofit status, your tax ID number. They will need that proof that you are eligible for what you're requesting. Then, like I said, they'll need names and addresses of your school board, things like that. Once you compile all that data, it is very quick to submit a grant, especially if you know exactly what you're looking for. And I've cut and pasted many times, my clear objectives for this grant, how this funding will be spent, and I would just seriously save it in a document, and I was able to revisit it. In the last 3 years I taught, I received over $10,000 in grant money, simply from opportunities like that, where you find a link on the internet. You can sign up for emails, actually email newsletters that will send you. I know Lego, for example, Lego Education will send you an email with that month's grant opportunities from different sources, and it does not have to be from Lego items. So really just quick Google searches for grants for a classroom will help you.
Great. We have a great question from Agatha. I like this very much. Said, thank you. I'm picking up several items that give me food for thought. But for someone like me who is a non-U.S.-based stakeholder, I'm a digital-only publisher. What is the most important takeaway I should have from your talk?
Basically, in that course, if you're a digital-only publisher, you're creating content, are you reaching out to schools? Promotion is a huge issue for authors and for publishers alike. Are you taking good advantage of the fact that schools are an excellent source of word of mouth? So when a teacher puts on her class website that this month my students are reading this book by this publisher, and here's what it's about, here's the reaction the students had to the book, here are reviews of it, are you posting it on places like Goodreads, Amazon, things like that? So basically by working hand in hand with schools, as you come across them who are going digital, then you've got great opportunities for some really good promotion.
Great. We have another great e-publisher question. What can I do as an e-publisher whose content is sometimes bought by public libraries to carry over our content into these devices that go into students' school bags?
Okay. First of all, again, you've got so many bridges between a public library and a school library. Those are typically on a town-by-town basis. Those are entities that do connect with each other, talk with each other at least, even if they're not funded together. But while you're reaching out to public libraries, pose the question to them. Do you know anyone at the local public school library? Can I also offer this content to them as well? Who should I speak to? So where you build a strong relationship with public libraries, it becomes very easy to also offer that relationship to school libraries. And from there, even at the library itself, some schools are becoming members of Overdrive, 3M, things like that, to offer eBooks to the students' own devices. But even there, the school librarian would know which teachers have gone digital or are coming up with innovations in class and who to talk to. It can be a tedious process, so you might want to start at the school board level. Our school board serves 16 different schools in our county, and so it might be a time saver to start at the school board level over books, textbooks, and content.
Thank you. Let's see, there are different platforms for e-publishing. There's Kindle and Mobi. I'm actually curious, do you ever, as a teacher, is there anything that you found you need to do to account for the differences in how things look or what the features are between different types of e-publishing platforms?
Right. When I first got started, of course, 2009, my options were very limited. Basically, at the time, we had the Kindle, and Nook was coming along, so it was getting some traction. I had actually purposely gone with the Nook, with the Kindle, because that was the one that allowed me to put one purchase on 6 devices. It allowed read aloud of most books. It wasn't perfect audio. It was nowhere near the quality of an audiobook. It was a computer-generated read aloud, like a text-to-speech program. But also we could adjust the font size very easily and things like that. So that is the one I went with. In terms of finding content, I do still find a lot more child-oriented content on Amazon, but I'm seeing just as much coming out with Kobo. And Kobo did tell me a couple months ago they are having a brand new push towards children's book publishing and children's book self-publishing. And so we're going to see an explosion in children's and young adult content for ebooks.
Great, thank you. Here's a great question. Any suggestions for ESL with read aloud features? This is kind of dovetails with what you were just talking about. Best publishers, best devices. It's from Doris.
Absolutely. In that case, you would want to be very particular about how you are getting the read aloud feature, if that's what you're looking for. I know for a fact, Number of the Stars on Kindle, the main character's name is Anne-Marie, and the Kindle calls her Anne-Marie. And so that would be a difficult transition for an ESL student, regardless of the language. So what I would still recommend for ESL students, even at their age, is our app books, tablet-based app books, where they have very purposeful narration included, so that it's not just a matter of relying on a text-to-speech, which may or may not be that great. I could tell when students were listening to the audio because occasionally somebody would start giggling and with their headphones on, and I would come over and he's like, she's calling him this, and they would laugh at the pronunciation, and we would have a good laugh about it. That was perfectly fine for students who already had a grasp at least of verbal English. It's not so great when you've got students who are struggling to learn an already difficult language. So your app books would be great. There's a lot of good platforms and a lot of devices that let the teacher record the story. I used to record short stories using Total Recorder software, and then I could put those files in the Kindles or on my desktops, and the students could hear my voice reading it as well.
Thank you. You spoke very eloquently about how stakeholders can potentially reach out to self-published authors. Mm-hmm. In the reverse, because something that we hear a lot of DCL when we do work with individual ebook authors, which we do, is how they can market their books. And so I'm curious as to how a self-publisher or a small publisher, and I think Agnes spoke to this from the small publisher viewpoint, but how an individual author can reach out to schools, or what they might do in order to help get their ebook into the classroom.
Absolutely. I have a very good friend. She was actually instrumental in me starting my company because I worked with her on the process, start to finish, of putting her book out there. She works with very at-risk teens who are just this side of ending up in my facility. She wrote a memoir about being put in a drug rehab as a teenager where they were physically and sexually abused by the staff. And basically, the crux of her book, she does discuss that, but really it was what brought her to that point. that she was placed there and what went wrong in her life. And so it's a really profound book, and it's great for teenagers. She actually has to reach out individually to schools. She has relied on libraries for a large portion of the help there, because mostly public libraries, especially the children's and teens librarians, because they are connected in such a way to the schools in the area, or even to the students themselves, the ones who love to read, who come into the library. And so she reaches out constantly. One of the things she did was create, of course, the ebook, but she also created a school edition of her own title where it had discussion questions already. So it was basically set up for teachers instantly to use, or school counselors and things like that. And it, of course, was censored in some way. It had the profanity removed to just show the first letter. So she had basically cleaned it up to make it more palatable to some people who may not want their children reading some of this content. And she does actually remove one of the scenes, one of the actual very physical, violent scenes, and just indicates in that edition of the book, this is somewhat what happened. You can read more about it on my website, and that way it's known what took place, but it's not laid out for the readers. She actually, like I said, takes it upon herself to contact libraries and schools. She's gone around the country speaking, because it was funded for her to speak by Scholastic 180, and actually has relied on a lot of other authors. She happens to know Ellen Hopkins, for example, and Luann Johnson, who wrote My Posse Don't Do Homework, and they've helped spread the word. But basically, a lot of people are choosing to self-publish their books for that very reason. It is not a very marketable book to the traditional publishing industry. It's a very niche book, and she knew that going into it. So there is a lot of content out there that would be really great for students to read if we can connect the authors and the teachers to it.
It's really interesting, too, I think, to think that independent authors have this opportunity, as it were, to impact the curriculum, because, that's definitely going outside of a traditional curriculum into one that's very topical, and as teachers are looking for new things and ways to engage their students, it seems like there's a rich opportunity. It's just a matter of getting those different parties to connect.
Right.
Okay. We have time for one more question, if anyone has one. And Mercy, if there's anything else you want to speak to that wasn't addressed in the Q&A, that would also be good.
While we're waiting, absolutely. Do not discount for even a second your students' smartphones. And even when we're looking at low-cost devices, prepaid smartphones are available readily, and they're able to support the Kindle and Nook reading apps, the iTunes reading, so depending on the phone. And we're seeing growing numbers of even adults who are choosing to read on the smartphone screen. I personally would never have thought that I would want to read a full-length book on my small phone. But we're seeing a sharp rise in the number of people who are opting to do that, especially with the phablets that are coming out, things like the Galaxy Note that are a large, oversized phone, but not quite an iPad mini or Kindle Fire. And so we're seeing a lot more of that content.
How does the digital divide, or it sounds like there are a lot of opportunities for individual grants, and you mentioned that you're in the South, and that you've worked in rural areas, and that there are it sounds like opportunities for Wi-Fi in neighboring areas to where you are. How does the digital divide come into play? I mean, has there been a great deal of forward movement? It sounds like from the fundraising opportunities that are there has been, but have you come up against it in any way?
It's really funny that every time I go to New York, there's no free Wi-Fi. There's paid Wi-Fi.
We in New York find that funny, too.
I know. I mean, seriously, and I don't guess it's a secret, I live in Choccolocca, Alabama, and our McDonald's has free Wi-Fi. So it's interesting to me that when I travel to major cities, London, for example, for the Future Book event, I had to bring portable Wi-Fi with me because there's no free Wi-Fi in these major cities. Right. But that's part of it, is that we're seeing so much funding is being set aside. And if you really look and get creative in what your needs are and how you can address the needs for funding sources, I seriously was given a terrorism grant for our school library. I Googled it. I found a grant, and the purpose of the grant was to replace books that were destroyed by acts of terrorism.
Wow.
In our facility, we have a and actually in our communities, most people are not aware of this, and I certainly was not before I worked where I did, we had a very serious gang problem in our country. And I sat down and wrote the grant and said, when the Crips and the Bloods fight in our facility and we have to mace them to stop the riot, the books get destroyed.
Wow.
When someone marks a gang sign on a page in a book, we have to tear the page out because it's a form of communication between gang members. And told them when the book is no longer readable because there's so many pages missing or because it's been sprayed with mace, we have to throw it out. And I was given the terrorism grant. So there are millions of dollars every year that go unclaimed in grant money because no one bothered to apply.
Right.
The Laura Bush Library Grant was given to all 50 states, 10 $500 grants to buy books for your school library. No other school in Alabama applied, and we were given the full $5,000.
Wow.
So the money's there. You know, it does take some work in finding it, and again, those authors are sitting there with a book that they would love to share, to have reviewed, to have talked about on class websites. It is a matter of finding them, and so that's a little bit of legwork. But if you're invested in a digital classroom, you can do it.
Great. Well, I think that's all our questions for today, so we're going to wrap up. If anyone listening has any further questions, any questions that are continue to come in the next few minutes, we can respond to them via email. You can also feel free to email us at the email address there, what that was on your screen. I guess we're out of time. That has been on your screen and that will be available when this comes to you via email. Thank you so much for joining us. And Mercy, it's always a delight to talk to you, and I always learn a lot speaking with you, and I hope everyone else feels that way having talked to you today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.